talking about building and sustaining OER at a large university and the various issues and challenges related to that. So, Perry. Great. We can see your slides. Can't hear you though.
That's because I had not unmuted yet. So
there you go. Excellent.
Once you do full screen, it gets harder to unmute. So, well, thank you all for having me, and it's wonderful to have heard my fellow panelists, and thanks to Todd and to Jill, especially for coordinating so much of this work. Again, I'm Perry Collins, the Scholarly Communications Librarian at the University of Florida. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm going to start talking about some of the work, in some ways framing a bit of a case study around some of the work that we're doing at UF. I will say that because I have to leave today right at 2:30, there might be some pieces that I skip over, and so I know I'm going to be talking to Jill and Todd about maybe recording a piece of this later on to add. So if there are other resources, we'll make sure to get those to you all to give some additional examples. But for today, I really want to focus in part on how we are going about at Florida thinking about the landscape on a really large campus. I've been at UF a little under 2 years, and I came most recently from another public institution in Indiana, Ball State University, which is about half the size, a little less than half the size. And it was pretty overwhelming for me to come to a larger campus. That said, apart from just the size of the campus, I think there are similar kinds of questions on campuses, large or small, about trying to sort of document a narrative around the history of open education work, who the stakeholders are, who's excited to be a partner, because that's often so important to really getting buy-in. And so I'm trying to share some of the work that we've been doing and some of our initial sort of forays into making that work more formalized and structured, again, in the a little under 2 years that I've been at UF. So unfortunately, my colleague and sort of co-conspirator, Micah Jenkins, wasn't able to join us today, but she and I really are true partners in a lot of this work. I'll talk more about some of our other partners as well. Over this academic year, we've tried sort of kind of an informal embedded librarian kind of model. She works with the Center for Teaching Excellence, and so I have made time as regularly as possible to actually be in that space, obviously before the pandemic, and really try to leave time for a lot of brainstorming and serendipitous kinds of discovery. Not everyone has that kind of time, but if you do, and you do have partners outside of your home unit on your campus, I'd really suggest trying that, because it's so nice to be able to have time, not for a meeting with a particular agenda where you have to get through A, B, and C and produce B, but that actually just having time to talk about what you want to do. So the key question that we keep coming back to over and over, that I think probably will be resolving throughout our careers possibly, is how are we trying to create an affordability, or more specifically here, an OER program that has clear goals, that is well communicated to the range of different constituencies on our campus and even beyond our campus. And I think, as Anita and Apurva have both gotten at as well, how are we documenting that work so that it is sustainable, so it is replicable, so that as funding streams change, which they do on every campus, and as people come and go, we don't lose the core of anything that we're developing. I think a lot of work has happened on our campus in kind of fits and starts. And I think our goal would be to come up with starting something that we know will continue, at least in some form. So all of our work on the entire UF campus around affordability has kind of fallen into this very large, sometimes unwieldy bucket that we're calling Affordable UF. This is kind of a brand that was developed at the provost level. And in some ways, it's difficult because it tries to encompass so much that we sometimes struggle to explain to people, well, here are your affordable options, right? You have your OER, you have your library resources. How do we sort of parse some of these and explain them to people? I think everyone struggles with that to some extent because there are so many different ways to try to save students money. That said, it's also been really useful because we're able to not reinvent the wheel when it comes to branding. We can share a lot of efforts. So I'm in the libraries, but I use this logo you see all the time because it was developed by Micah's graphic designer colleague in the Center for Teaching Excellence. So again, working across those partnerships for efficiencies of scale can be useful. Again, I'm in the libraries, and so I won't delve too much into some of the things that we've already heard a lot about, especially when it comes to discovery, trying to connect with instructors to focus on adoption, trying to do some of the behind the scenes work of our catalogers and electronic resources librarians. We are trying to do some of that work, but I think that's been well covered. I will highlight some of our publishing work that we are trying to do and how that complements our partners' efforts. And then as with most libraries, we're trying to think about what are some of these other layers of expertise. So I'm often looked to as a copyright librarian. That's a big part of my job. So that certainly is relevant to OER. But we also have people who are experts in pedagogy and particular disciplines, and trying to leverage all the expertise that we have can be like herding cats, but can also be really valuable. Micah's office, I won't go too much into this, but they offer a sort of broad range of services and programs around instructional assessment and evaluation. They do a lot of professional development work that I will talk about. They were tasked with a lot of affordability related work a few years ago when the state of Florida started requiring the state university system campuses to do an annual report up to the Board of Governors. And so we're just finishing that up for this year right now. But they do a lot of the assessment work around that and sort of data collection. From there, a lot of other programs developed sort of under their purview. So again, I don't have time to go into too many of these, but they manage an affordable badging program that sort of recognizes instructors who are trying to keep costs below $20 per credit hour. They run a couple of other programs and sort of infrastructural pieces that I'll talk about. And then we have other partners. Just before the pandemic, it was kind of sad timing. We had our first meeting of our OER Advancement Task Force, which we're hoping will be a group of around 7 to 8 people, sort of stakeholders on campus, who can just offer some ideas, opinions, sort of help brainstorm about strategy, about fundraising, about goals over time. And so we also are looking to our instructional designers who typically have more expertise in accessibility in particular, to our university press. They actually, about a decade ago, were the ones who really started publishing OER textbooks on our campus. And so we're talking to them about how to adapt that earlier program to some of what we have now. And then of course, our students and instructors from academic departments. How do we ask what they want instead of assuming we know what they want, which is sometimes a challenge because we're trying to move so quickly that we need to pause often, I think, and have some conversations. So I have a few lessons learned sprinkled throughout the slides. And again, for me, this was one where it's important sometimes to remind myself that pausing and reflecting and having conversations can be really valuable. I'm trying to be better about taking credit for that work and saying this in and of itself is an output. You don't have to create an OER textbook to be doing OER work. And then also I think with this, I put here, making sure that you're giving credit. So much work has come before us all. So if we're getting started now, I think we all have to be more humble and willing to say, look at all that has been done and how do we build on and adapt that rather than reinventing the wheel. So I do want to highlight a few pieces that are focused around publication and dissemination of some of our work. And again, these kind of involve several different offices or departments coming together. So let's see. The first, which Anita mentioned, is Pressbooks. So this is a tool like any other. I think it has become one of the more widely used platforms for digital publishing. And it's something that I think has been valuable for us, not only because of its sort of functionality, but also because of the community around it and its role as a jumping off point for conversations with instructors about what can we do, what is possible. This is something we've been able to offer to everyone on our campus, and that is a function of sort of our privilege at the University of Florida as a relatively well-resourced institution, so we can really say to everyone, go ahead and try out this tool. And so we're seeing lots of different kinds of projects, some that I would call OER, some not, some experiments, some that might become full-fledged open textbooks, but it's really exciting just to see what people might want to do. The other piece of this that I'm more involved with is the library press at UF. And that is sort of a program that is still in its nascent phases, where we are in the libraries developing an imprint, University Press of Florida and the libraries. I've kind of taken on a role as an sort of de facto editor of our open textbook streams. We're doing very little in this area so far. We're really just still getting started, which has been really exciting. And so we're kind of thinking about how we intervene or add value to projects that have already been going. So projects that really haven't started with us. So a couple of examples of those include 2 books that just happen to be within the College of Engineering. They're really very different projects with very interesting and different histories that, again, kind of reflect the variety of partners that we're trying to pull together. So one is an engineering capstone design project led by someone who also just joined the University of Florida this year, Matt Traum. He's a mechanical engineer. And so he's been starting to work with graduate assistants and with students in his own courses to think about and brainstorm what they might need for a book project around this and to draft some of the material. This started with an informal conversation with Micah at our new faculty orientation this past year. And then the impact of materials in society is out of the material science program, and it received a major NSF grant a few years ago. It's already been going on for about 5 years. They've developed a lot of material that's already available online under an open license. And now we're kind of thinking about how do we sort of refine and reshape some of this material so that it can live as an open textbook, something that we can actually distribute and make available a little bit more sustainably. And that project really started with a conversation with the Center for the Humanities on our campus, and again, with the press. And so we're figuring out how do we use this as an example of kind of handing off that program to the library press. I think I don't need to be, I'll be the third person to make the point that we certainly have projects other than textbooks. I have a background in the digital humanities, and I'm especially excited about some of these projects. This first one has kind of been honestly our flagship OER project. It's not one that I've really been involved with directly, but Micah and her office have been very involved, both in sort of coordinating funding and in helping to promote it. Our math department has, for many of their courses now, especially high enrollment courses, replaced a fairly expensive commercial textbook and homework package with this Chronos open homework system and an OpenStax textbook. So that's kind of where a lot of our bigger savings on our campus are coming from at the moment. And then Micah is also working on a project called Florida CourseShare, which I think we had already seen examples from Canvas or other places, or Merlot, where you can find courses. This is an effort specifically to share across state university system institutions in Florida, where we have similar kinds of courses and similar requirements. And so it's a little bit easier to share. UF has been kind of a lead in some of this. And so we have a few projects being piloted right now. And that's something where certainly if you're interested in that as a model, then reaching out to Micah would be great. And then finally, one that I've been really involved with, last year we had a really incredible one-week institute on digital Caribbean studies. This was funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities. We brought together about 40 people in Caribbean studies all across the US and the Caribbean, and thought about digital humanities broadly, but more specifically pedagogy and open educational resources. And what does OER mean in some of the contexts that we've heard about already, that where we have questions of technology access, where we have questions of maybe not being able to have consistent kinds of access or consistent needs across institutions and across student audiences. And so right now we're in the process of following up with our participants. They've been working all year on specific courses. And so we're gathering their reflections, their syllabi, digital projects that their students created or that they created, lesson plans, all kinds of things. So this is just a screenshot, but within a few months, we should have a pretty robust website of some of that material. And I'm really excited about that. So again, the lesson learned here, it's a lot. My lesson has been just to get started where you can and to start with things that are really exciting. It's really hard to start with something that feels like someone else's project. Obviously, all of us come from different institutional contexts and have different expectations in our positions. I'm really fortunate that I have a lot of flexibility and I'm able to take on some projects where I feel like a core intellectual partner, and I feel I can be really sort of excited and engaged by some of these projects. Then the next thing, and I'll probably end with this section, is on professional development. Again, this is an important partnership piece for us because we have really in the libraries kind of attached ourselves, for lack of a better term, to the Center for Teaching Excellence's framework for professional development. So we obviously do a lot of programming in the libraries ourselves, but we don't necessarily always try to reach instructors in the way that CTE does. They have a built-in network. They have a lot of, again, graphic design elements and marketing around this. And so we have done a couple of things with them in the past year, several kind of one and done sorts of workshops through their Passport to Great Teaching program, where everyone gets a physical kind of passport that gets stamped, and you get points toward a certificate. And there's a track within that around affordability. So we did several programs this year around course reserves, around copyright, a couple of different kinds of topics. To be honest, the attendance at those has been a little bleak. We have had very few people come, and so I think I've been thinking more about how do we convert some of that to asynchronous materials that people can pick up when they really have time, or to opportunities where we have clear expectations for attendance and that are more structured. But I do have really appreciated the flexibility of this model to test out some ideas and develop some materials in the first place. So in an effort to do something a little bit more ambitious, we're following the lead of quite a few other institutions in developing a faculty learning community, or really we're really just calling it an OER learning community because it welcomes faculty and staff who are doing this work. So this is a framework that CTE developed. They have a range of different topics for learning communities every year. And they bring together usually a very small cohort of just a few members to really be able to delve deeply into the issues at hand. And so for this one, we will be working specifically on what we're calling affordable access for student success. So we have an application out right now. We are planning to select 4 people. We have secured funding from our library to give $1,000 stipends. That's kind of a sustainability question, and something I think if you want to do a program like this, you have to think about. It's very important to me that we compensate people where we can, but that isn't always possible at every institution. And even for us, I think it's something where we would be, it'll be a challenge to get this kind of funding every single year to do this. So we're gonna have to think strategically about that. But that said, I'm very excited for this, again, as a really structured way for us to bring together a set of people and work with them in depth on their particular projects, but with some common values, with kind of a shared knowledge base. We can bring in expertise on our campus. We're going to pay honoraria to a couple of external experts as well. But where everyone, again, is present, is willing to kind of teach one another, is really thinking not just about how to save students money, but also how to make our education better, how to make our materials better, more accessible, more equitable, more inclusive. These are questions we hear a lot of. And so tying those to the sort of immediacy of OER is important to me. And then also thinking about feasibility. Again, it's very important for me to stress that baby steps are great. And so we've tried to say to people, please feel free to propose a module, a chapter of a textbook, something that you can really get started on and develop a plan for during this year, but not something necessarily that you're going to finish up. So again, this was my sort of lesson learned that I mentioned. Remembering that all of this takes a lot of time, and starting small and with things that you can reuse or where you know you'll have an audience is a great way to start. So I'm gonna skip over my assessment piece and end there because I think I'm kind of at the end of my time. It looks like I have about 5 more minutes or so. So if anyone has questions, I'm happy to chat or answer those.
Perry,
Sorry.
are you there, Todd?
Yes, sorry, I was unmuting myself on unmuting myself on the wrong computer. Oops. So thanks, Perry. Really great presentation, really great work you're doing down in Florida. In the last minute or so that we have with you, this has been a thread through this has been the great partnership that Florida has had with its university press. Have you, is the university press part of the library? I know a number of institutions have like kind of, university presses have reporting facility into, say, the director of the library. Is that the case in Florida, or is that a separate?
That's a great question. No, actually, we're separate. We don't have even a nominal reporting structure up to the same and within the same unit. So we know the press very well, though, obviously, and are really supporters of the press and their work. Romy Gutierrez is the relatively new director of the press. And again, they started about a decade ago publishing a handful of textbooks, including one in theater that is still used in a lot of our high enrollment courses. And honestly, the funding ran out. And this is one of those questions around sustainability that we've been talking about. How do we keep up some of this pipeline? They weren't able to keep some of those projects going. The library press started in partnership with them to start thinking about how to reissue out of print books from the press through another grant program. And since then, we've really developed a more robust kind of work. They work with us a lot on things like print on demand. They offer a lot of expertise on publishing workflows. So we really do work together closely. And I think we're still a little up in the air on how roles and responsibilities will be parsed when it comes to OER work.
Yeah. All right. Well, great. Congratulations and thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate it.